Chasing the mirage of certainty is daunting and permanently elusive. It is the intrinsic fear of the unknown future that drove humans to try and collectively create protected spaces. These collective work efforts slowly evolved to become diverse forms of governance. Humans formed groups, settlements, and circumscribed them with high walls and stocked food in search for that certainty and feeling of security. Yet uncertainty remained a fact of life. It pierces through our safe bubbles by unexpected events of nature, or ironically, by the malfunctioning of systems of our own making. Systems that were created specifically to protect us from our uncertain world. Protecting the people's interests and aspirations against uncertainty was the purpose of those bodies. With time, those particular bodies of governance became objectives by themselves, slowly drifting away from their original purpose. Eventually, those bodies detached from the people, and thus betraying the fundamental values they were created to serve. As democracy promised, attempts to develop those systems continued. Yet nowadays, we as individuals are experiencing more isolation from one another, with less ability to work collectively and less access to fixing our systems of governance. On another level, political leaders promising imaginary certainty have based it on protection to a system of zero-sum games. Our own safe spaces were set to maximize our gains at the expense of the other, and as the only way to maximize our certainty. Unfortunately, competition became the driving mindset for the systems of power we created. It became the salient feature of our systems, from the very macro level of nations down to the very micro level of our daily life struggles. Neoliberalism answers our incapacity to resolve these deviations from original intentions of our systems by shifting back the attention to the individual level, bombarding us on a daily basis with slogans of collaboration, sharing, and win-win modes. The fact remains that values of competition and mindsets of winner takes it all stand as central values of our systems. Ironically, those values only further entrench the invigorated competitors' discourse, promising more certainty to the people despite its impossibility, and going into vicious circles of chasing mirages. What's more alarming is the fertile ground such values provide for demagogues, explaining the unfairness of our system and unjust distribution of wealth by blaming it on the other, and thus paving the way for the spread of hate speech, racism, and exclusionary right-wing rhetoric. So the question that presents itself: how do we combat this? And is there any hope? My talk tonight on certainty and hope is not a self-help instruction, nor is it a motivational speech telling you to unleash the giant in you, or you can achieve anything you want. I'm also not here to analyze how activists can mobilize the different social groups and or how to influence their interests in order to undermine the establishment's strongly anchored pillars. In fact, I would like to focus on uncertainty as one of many hurdles faced by activists as we charge towards clashing with the establishment and propose ways to overcome them. In brief, activists need to doubt certainty and embrace uncertainty as our main ally. For that, I will share a series of my observations through my political experience and activism, which I have been undertaking since 2015. A career I've never planned to pursue. It was a shift that I found myself being lured into despite its high uncertainty. In fact, when I look back at it now, I find that it was uncertainty that attracted me to it. It got me obsessed with the tiny unseen opportunities in the system and its long declared status quo. Opportunities marked by flagrant social injustice, change in demographics, incapacitated sophisticated political systems and new online tools, disseminating messages beyond the controlled spaces of the traditional political parties. Being trained as an architect, I often use my spatial lens to visualize problems, like in buildings and walls. When thinking about this talk, I imagine a wall. Call it the wall of certainty. This wall can be seen from a distance as an unbreakable entity one can never overcome. But upon closer inspection, and especially to those looking carefully, one can see many cracks, many different cracks on that wall. That makes us realize that it's not as impossible to destroy. This talk is about these cracks. The Lebanese people have long been taught a number of certainties about their country, which I found to be illogical. What were mere constructs and projections to me as a young expat returning home were for the average person unchallengeable facts, verified and validated by theory, experience, and political populist narratives dominating mainstream media. Discriminating between people on sectarian basis was alien to me, and how that narrative was an answer to many eager to quench their thirst by a fictitious and temporary sense of belonging or security. It was a concept that puzzled me. This system has been based on constructs of الطوائف المتخيلة, imaginary sects, as Azmi Bshara names them in his book الطائفة الطائفية والطوائف المتخيلة, are a continuation of a confessional representation system that was introduced back in the 19th century in al-Mutasarrifiyya. Despite Bshara qualifying them as imaginary, those modes of representation still exist and are established as group of political operation. Bshara's qualification of them as imaginary due to the absence of common interest stemming from confessional identity. Those imaginary groups are based on a single specific dimension of our identity, supported by a narrative of victimization, claiming certainty of the imminent threat of the other groups. An eclectic historical narrative of incidents and motives is always available to validate those narratives. Sectarian politicians representing historical certainties are all attempts to create spaces that promise protect against the other. As a result, the different sectarian spaces established become coexisting in a competitive mode between one another over the leadership, resources, and dominance. In those fertile grounds of competition, sectarian leaders grow their exclusionary discourse, turning the sectarian spaces into spaces of imaginary certainties threatened by the other. Exclusionary spaces are founded on a number of pillars: purity of sectarian identity, economic solidarity and privileges, and of course, protection from outside threats using sectarian arms. In addition, sectarian social and economic institutions were created to serve and ensure the functionality of these exclusionary bodies. Interestingly, that system has failed throughout history to provide the basic services and rights to its people. One can quickly flip through newspapers 50 or 60 years ago to find that some of our basic demands and services lacking back then remain unresolved until this day, a direct result of the system that governed us since. Despite many attempts to challenge that system and develop it into a modern state, the sectarian leaders benefited from regional and economic factors that helped them survive and continue. Sectarian spaces kept gradually increasing their role as intermediates between individuals and the state, reaching a level of near exclusivity. But currently, there is a significant change in the dynamics, and sectarian leaders are more exposed. As the sectarian narratives got more radical because of the intensifying competition between the different factions, the state's functionality declined dramatically and was further aggravated by a cut in foreign aid due to shifts in geopolitical agendas. Weakening the state has been systematic, with current ruling parties continuing to undermine its role and credibility in the eyes of the Lebanese people on all levels. An obvious agenda serving the sectarian parties from two entry points. It relieves them from accountability and simultaneously validates their neoliberal agenda that states that state should not be providing services. Now it's getting worse with the gap resolution and the financial crisis. So they're basically destroying the state. Exposing the failures of our compounded system can be traced back to the garbage crisis in 2015. It was a date that proved to be a milestone in the history of resistance against the establishment. The Lebanese were shocked to witness their failed system struggle to resolve the basic issue of collecting waste from the streets, but to no end. All the competition to project certainty and security within the sectarian bubbles evaporated as the people discovered the new real threat to their lives, and that was the garbage on the streets. Usually it was the individual who makes up for the lack of services by the state through personal level solutions. Only this time, the garbage crisis was unlike other services. This was unlike the lack of electricity, public education, or universal health coverage, which could have been resolved on an individual level. People were angry and perplexed about what to do, so they hit the streets to mark the beginning of acknowledgement of the role of the state and to refute the big lie of certainty propagated by the traditional parties. Some began to embark on a long journey with multiple uncertainties and confrontation that is going to this day, that's ongoing to this day. Certainty seekers who found refuge in imagined certainty of sectarian narratives were now on shaky grounds and in a position that was not certain anymore. One can imagine how we, as natural certainty seekers, would feel while living through the deterioration situation of the country. Desperation nowadays rules, and all doors seem closed without a glimpse of hope for change. We as Lebanese have repeatedly challenged the system. We have put up fight after fight, year after year, generation after generation, and the results were nil. While the political establishment remains in power, it is crippled and cannot take any step towards reform. No alternative political power is rising up to the occasion to take charge of the country. But what was once declared as a deeply entrenched certainties are suddenly now facing two levels of serious challenges. Locally, we are witnessing the opposite of social explosion. With the lack of hope, change for change, through the tools of protest, demonstration, we are experiencing a social implosion. Mass immigration, the increase in local and domestic violence, the disintegration of public institutions, and increasing rates of suicide are some harsh examples. Sectarian parties are becoming more radical and more violent in protecting their territories from any potential opposition by individuals, thereby further narrowing the margins of freedom of speech and expression. Their bubble supporter base is largely losing faith in them. That base is disintegrating as well. On another level, regionally and internationally, a genuine lack of interest in engaging in Lebanon's internal affairs is a new position for some of the key regional players. This is unprecedented for Lebanon. We have historically enjoyed regional and international support since the founding of our country. This is also disturbing the local political balance, and in turn, reducing the traditional party's margins of maneuver and access to funds. Unfortunately, but quite understandably, many Lebanese have already given up. The futility of resolving the Lebanese political system has become a certitude to many, thus declaring beforehand the outcomes of any attempt to fix the system as a complete waste of time. For them, in brief, nothing has changed and nothing will change. With that kind of equation, it's true. The future looks very grim with no prospects of change in the current status quo. But that is only if we insist on ignoring all new givens as we rush to construct our new certainties. Of course, hope for change cannot be seen if we insist on dismissing opportunities as the new uncertainties unfold, and if we insist on turning a blind eye to the expanding cracks within the system. Yes, there is more than what we see through our lens of desperation. I admit that the establishment has won many battles over us, but that doesn't mean we haven't heard them. It's true that many have grown more cynical after repeatedly experiencing one setback after the other. But it's also true that many are still willing to resist. I have encountered during my activism a lot of pushback from the people on standing up and resisting, especially on the occasions when I ran for elections. Convincing people to engage in election was not an easy task, and many were discouraged from voting as the outcome would most certainly remain unchanged. But guess who was right at the end? The result speaks for themselves. We are experiencing a historic opportunity to engage in a process of change on the condition that we mobilize and convert people to become uncertainty endorsers. The perception of a hopeless situation can be converted into a perception of potential for change only if we endorse uncertainty, regardless of the final outcome, and not precondition our engagement to a predefined shape to success. Overcoming addiction to certainty will open the door to many unseen opportunities. Our starting point is the inevitability of change, coupled with a realistic assessment of the political opportunity for this specific moment in time. Engaging uncertainty can be a demanding task. Such a framework requires an ability to maneuver through a number of levels, and all from new perspectives. It's our role as political activists to promote embracing uncertainty. For the other alternative would be a replication of zero-sum games and a race to imagine certainties that prove to be a definitive failure. Engaging uncertainty can be at the following three levels. First, at the individual level. When starting to embark on a journey of political change, every individual faces the challenge of uncertainty, and achievement measures become very pertinent. Will it work? Will it not work? How is my contribution affecting the results? And as most of us volunteer for such work, questions arise on the efficiency and significance of one individual's contribution. Moreover, prolonged durations of activism and confrontation with the establishment raise more questions. How long will it take to realize change? Am I wasting my time? Is it worth giving up my personal life, time, and energy for an uncertain outcome? Our general context as individuals does not help much either. We are victims to the mode of instant reward and gratification induced by social media, that poses a serious threat on our levels of endurance and patience as well. Of course, we all need to put a plan or at least a roadmap for the fight, be it short-term or long-term. But it cannot be definitive, and it surely comes with no guarantees. But then what will be our drive? How can we take on such a huge task of making a change in a country so complex with no set objectives? The answer lies in integrating uncertainty in the plan, from setting the team to defining the goals and expectation to the duration of the plan. Working without expectations can be like walking with no directions for some. One needs to manage this urge for the certainty of some overly defined objectives, which can put us as individuals at risk of disappointment in case they are unmet. In political activism, when facing such a dominating and powerful establishment, setting goals becomes an even more complex exercise. This is not saying that we shouldn't confront the establishment without any goal set. However, setting multiple goals for each can vary for a single action, allowing for expectations to be variable in response to the uncertainty of the political context. Towards the end of the year 2015, and after the garbage crisis, I took part in Beirut Madinati, a campaign for municipal elections in Beirut. I joined the campaign as a potential candidate. Back then, I had no real political experience, yet I wanted to run because I believe that Beirut deserved to be run in a better way. As an urban planner, I felt that it was a role I can play given my professional background. We were a small group, and at the launch of the campaign in Arus al-Bahr restaurant, we got very little attention. I remember only one TV station covering the event and 12 people in the audience. Most people believed that we couldn't make a change, and honestly, so did I. The novelty in our approach to local politics was by itself a significant goal to achieve. And it turned out to be a turning point in Lebanon political history. It was the first time an anti-establishment list wins 40% of the votes. I would have still been very satisfied with our success if we didn't even reach that number of votes. And from the very beginning, as I was venturing into these uncharted waters, I was very careful to set several expectations for myself, while remaining fully committed and engaging in the campaign. Almost none of us in Beirut Madinati was upset for losing the elections. In fact, we ended up celebrating because it was very clear how many of our targets were achieved. Beirut Madinati is now considered a milestone in Lebanon's history, a time when a bunch of young activists decided to stand up to the establishment, and they almost did it. Agility and responsiveness are additional principles required for integrating uncertainty in our activism. In a very volatile political environment, like the one we have here, the givens and the context keep shifting, and surprises do not stop popping up. Changes in regional geopolitics impact us directly as well, thus increasing the complexity of our local politics. Incidents will occur quite frequently during execution, and a shift in plans should become second nature. As we were planning for parliamentary elections of May 2018, numerous incidents occurred that affected our campaign plan. Yet the most major of those was the detention of Prime Minister Hariri in the time of October-November 2017. For many campaigns, it was a knockout, and they were never able to recover from that blow. In our campaign, called Kilna Beirut, all of us Beirut, it took us some time to absorb the shock and change course, but we remained determined to continue. Adjustment to our political communication campaign had to be done, shifting to a more positive campaign strategy so as to avoid a direct confrontation with the new momentum, sympathizing with Prime Minister Hariri. From there on, we kept adjusting course as obstacles arose. We were not as successful as Beirut Madinati, but by the end of the election, we got around 6,200 votes in Beirut too, and we ranked 5th out of 9 lists in Beirut. And it was, what's most important, an important indicator of the anti-sectarian bloc of voters in Beirut. Managing uncertainty at the group level, collective frameworks are essential for consolidating our individual efforts. In addition to the challenges we face on the individual level, as discussed earlier, there are types of challenges that face activists when working in collective frameworks. The uncertainty can be expected externally or internally from within the group members themselves. Accessing resources and grouping activists for long-term battles is a challenging and many times unsustainable task, unlike gathering efforts for short-term projects and specific tasks, which is more accessible. There is high uncertainty in maintaining collective framework, since the individual commitment can be shaky. Accordingly, it is expected to have unforeseen changes in individuals and individual commitments on the long term. This can present challenges to reliability and resourcing, as well as access to expertise. Connecting individual activists in a flexible network can penetrate through the individual uncertainties and make use of all available resources needed for either long-term or short-term interventions. In Kilna Beirut campaign, there was some pushback from numerous activists to engage in 2018 elections. Many activists back then thought we should boycott the elections, as it will give legitimacy to the establishment with no equal opportunity for competition with them. Nevertheless, we and some other activists decided to run, but we faced a problem in mobilizing those activists for support. Many had decided not to engage at all. Thus, for those of us who decided to run, we had a problem of resourcing for the campaign. In Kilna Beirut, we created a network, linking some activists outside and inside the country with the campaign, some for professional advice, others for production, and so on. No one had to commit fully to the campaign. Partial support was rallied on personal basis. We made the best of the available individual resources and secured additional support for unseen incidents. It was a very successful campaign. And this network model would prove to be instrumental in paving the way for our bigger success in 2022 with Beirut Tuqaw. It also made me realize that creating battles is the way to bring the right people together. I tried once before to join a political movement in the early 1990s when Rafiq Hariri momentum had just started. And it took me 2 meetings to realize I didn't belong there. Conversely, when people joined Kilna Beirut, their first impression was, where were all those people hiding? They suddenly felt they belonged, and that we all came together for the right cause. This effect was also noticed in Beirut Madinati and Beirut Tuqaw campaigns. In 17 October 2019, unexpected waves of people went down to the streets to express their outrage against the corrupt system. It was after a call by a small group of activists in response to the infamous unjust tax on WhatsApp calls. Just 2 weeks earlier, I was having coffee with a journalist friend of mine. We wondered why people were silent as the new taxes were about to be imposed. But it wasn't the tax on the WhatsApp that triggered people. By that time, the financial crisis was beginning to show. Banks had started to experience shortages in dollars. The lira was dropping in value in the parallel market. Gas stations stopped distributing gas a number of times. Things were happening too fast, and we were overwhelmed with the accelerating events, and with the floods of people on the streets all over the country. At the street, we as activist groups and individuals began connecting to form coordination networks. Everyone instantly felt the urgency and responsibility. All differences were dropped and quickly attended to the accelerating developments on the streets. Very swiftly and spontaneously, coordination developed into collaboration. Uncertainty forced us into collaboration. We were collaborating on unifying political demands and political roadmaps, on organizing tents and stages within the squares, on calling for demonstrations, sometimes even on media appearances and talking points, and many other details during the revolution. Network between activists had already been established, and this allowed us to embrace uncertainty in a collaborative, non-exclusionary framework. Despite the political differences we had, at that point, there was almost no competition. The model was successful in embracing uncertainty, leading to a unified front against the establishment. So how do we manage uncertainty on the political level? That moment of October 17 was a moment of political clarity from one side, and a moment of openness and inclusion as well. A clear line was drawn between us and the establishment. This line was coined by the slogan "Killun yani killun." All of them means all of them. It set the political responsibility for the corruption and mismanagement that led to the collapse of the state and the economy on those who were in power and who were witness to all of what happened. Beyond that line, our space was inclusive. Unlike the sectarian spaces, ours were not exclusive and open to anyone who believed in our political principle. Openness and inclusion were actually a direct translation of our acceptance to uncertainty. It was based on confronting our political rivals with clarity, but not as the other. Our spaces remain open and tolerant to anyone who shares our political ideas. We fought for the right of all people without discrimination, including our rival supporters, despite their lack of awareness or willingness to admit it. We are confronting our political opponents whose certainty is exclusionary, as they claim to monopolize the truth, while we fight back by creating our own spaces of endorsing uncertainty with openness to diversity and plurality. Defying the existing system with their imaginary certainties and exclusionary bubbles requires an alternative model to counter it. I'm suggesting an inclusive cooperative one. The antidote to rigid systems of competitiveness is found in exposing their fakeness and by infiltrating their base from their weakest points before knocking heads directly with the establishment. Although there are many factors playing against us, there are also many factors playing against the establishment that can be turned to our favor. Upon first inspection, the reading of the overall situation is very gloomy and grim, and all the possible entry points to a change seem closed. There is absolute certainty that nothing will happen and that we are doomed. It looks like a dead end, or like we have hit a brick wall. But take a few steps closer and look more carefully. And this is when you can start seeing the cracks in that wall of certainty more clearly. The establishment parties are losing some of their supporters base. Some of them are lacking in resources, and their strongest tool, consisting in their sectarian narrative, is losing traction. We can all see the lack of interest in regional countries in Lebanon. Again, I don't mean to paint a rosy picture of things. I recognize that it's not only the local context that's going through a crisis, but the international community as well. The tide is high, and neoliberalism is too fierce of a monster, and we cannot isolate ourselves from that. But embracing uncertainty and learning to work with no assurances of success is, ironically, the straightforward, linear way of achieving our goals. We need to get out of our comfort zone, defy our nature as certainty seekers, and recognize that the outside world is not as predictable as our heart desire. This leaves us with no option but the acceptance and the endorsement of uncertainty. The call for action and resistance is not a call for a romanticized version of resistance that promises big and fails to deliver. It's a call to look at our situation realistically and embrace the opportunities that lay in front of us as uncertainty unfolds. We can define a new form of resistance focused on small opportunities, win them, connect them, and grow them. We need to start finding all the cracks in the wall of certainty and expanding them. People often talk about the role of hope in hard times. Others find that to be a sedative, leading people to ignore the harsh realities of the world. But hope is not about claiming to know that the future will be better. There is no basis for that. Hope only implies the belief that things may change, and that means we don't know what will happen. Hope requires uncertainty, and without any hope, nobody can be motivated to make any change. Hope becomes reasonable when coupled with non-stop action through a collaborative approach that complements logical calculations. Change requires hope, and hope requires uncertainty. When you want things to change, you need to resist the innate temptation for certainty to take a risk. Uncertainty is our strongest ally. We need to learn to make more cracks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Where were we going to sit? Thank you very much. So I think we're opening it now to questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead and raise your hand. Yes, go ahead. Ready?
Thank you very much. I think the whole theme of the day was about uncertainty, and I think you really tried to inspire hope, because what's certain is that we're going to be living with this uncertainty for a very long time. Okay, my question is, I feel like you were talking from the perspective of you, of course, because you're you, and from the perspective of someone in politics. But I feel like from the perspective of a citizen, having to deal with this uncertainty on a daily basis gets very tiring. And I think what happened, for example, with me, but also with a lot of people that I know, is that because there's so much uncertain things happening, sometimes we're forced to dissociate from the situation because we're too busy surviving and trying to cope and all of that. And I feel like a lot of the times we talk less and less about what's happening. And this is kind of the cost of uncertainty for me. So how can we kind of find the balance between surviving in these crazy times while keeping track of the bigger picture and the longer term vision and the state and the dream, which is very much unattainable because of the uncertainties that we're living in. So advice for the young people.
I totally understand that how such a volatile and uncertain environment can have an impact on any individual living in this country. Again, I think we have been living through that for a very long time. We've experienced it more certain times than others, but uncertainty in Lebanon has been quite very, very, very visible, even if you just forget about it. I remember it, like 20 years ago when I started working, even before, decisions that I used to make were all based on how this country is so uncertain. So where do you work, where do you live, your children's school, your future, your career path, it's all built around this, okay? I understand it's difficult to include certainty or to endorse certainty at the individual level, but I think there is some kind of an internal exercise here. I'm not talking about the politics and how to ameliorate our daily lives and how to change, because this is something else. But it's something that we know that will not continue. This is for sure. It's not something we know we can change and we can work towards it. This is something that you can shift your uncertainty to a productive and targeted. You transfer all that energy to something positive and be part of something bigger that can really have an impact or change that volatile environment we're living in. I think that's the best way I would think about it, because in 2015 when I joined Beirut Medina, this was one of the key factors that actually encouraged me to join the campaign, is that I wanted to make it better, and I wanted to, for me and my children, to change that situation we're living in. So engaging in politics, engaging in public interest and common interest, it's something that will help you feel part of battling that volatility.
We have another.
Thank you for this. I mean, as a person who researches parliaments and national legislators, this has been very beneficial to hear you speak about your experience and also your background in socio-political activism. I'm going to try to not abuse this moment and ask you so many questions, because there were so many good points that you mentioned in your keynote. When you talk about, while you were talking about your experience, you cited so many times about your activist kind of background. But now you're an MP, you have been voted in, you have a successful story in terms of people that come from relatively different background. So what I kept on hearing is that there's dichotomy between, do you see yourself as a political activist first and then an MP second? Is there a hierarchy when it comes to those things? And you said before that as an MP you don't try to influence activists. But I'm trying to go back to your experience when you were an activist. Were you trying to get some sort of influence from those politicians? Were you trying to create some sort of change that now you kind of see it in a different way, due to the fact that you do wear many hats, but at the same time you kind of extrapolate from your experiences and so forth? And my last question is that one of the things that you mentioned is that the state has been destroyed in a way, or crippled. So as a member of parliament, what is there left for you to work with?
Hardball questions.
Okay, so I'll start with the last question. This is actually a valid question regarding our role as MPs. We're coming from an activist background, and in fact, just the last few weeks I was really thinking about what we can do in Parliament. I remember very clearly when I was running in elections in 2022, being super transparent with our voters. I used to tell them, don't expect that we'll be doing much, okay? We will be a minority. And we know how the Parliament is run. Nabil Berri takes control of everything, so yeah, we know our limitations, okay? So there isn't much to do in the Parliament in terms of achieving legislation or influencing government or policies, etc. So that's for me, at least I know I can do. I've always also said, so the question would be next, why are you running? Why do you want to be a parliamentarian? And I said, we needed that legitimacy. We needed to prove that we have a popular base. We needed to show us and them that we really represent. You know, there is a good section of the population that wants to change. And accordingly, I always focused on working outside the parliament, given that status we have now. For me, as a parliamentarian, with that kind of number of votes I got, I can work within Beirut in a very different way than I used to be as an activist. So that's partly what's important about being in parliament. But to tell you the truth, I think now we have even, with things deteriorating further, the status of a parliamentarian becomes even a further burden. Okay. So now, after almost 1 year, 10 months of in parliament, we have got our legitimacy. We have established that we represent, that there is a kind of a movement, popular movement. But people still hold you accountable as a parliamentarian of what you do and what you cannot do. And that's very troubling, because for me at least, it's very, I was very transparent about it. But people, they have absolutely all the right to ask what are you doing. And there are a lot of expectations and a lot of expectations from us, especially as new parliamentarians or deputies. But the fact remains that we can do very little. And now, with things getting worse, those voices are increasing. So it becomes a real question, and this is something we need to think of, how we're going to continue working as deputies, and whether in parliament or outside of parliament. Because we cannot just ignore that we are deputies and work from outside simply as political activists. So this is something. So what was the other question, sorry?
The first question is that you talk a lot about your political activism,
Yeah.
and you still mention right now that as a political activist, but does it differ from one day to another? I mean, is it more because the duties and interests are very different from being a political activist in India?
Well, yeah, it's true in some sense, but I still consider myself a political activist in the way I do my parliamentary work, and these are very little details and lines that you draw within your work in parliament. And this is something that is highly debatable, but we're exploring it and experimenting with it, me and other deputies, is with regard to your relationship with the other political parties. So as an activist, you don't have to engage or talk or have a dialogue, or even sometimes befriend them. For me, it's all these little and sensitive details make all sense. Like, for example, even when I work in parliament, I pick and choose who I say hi to, and in the way I say hi to them, because I still remain coming from that place where we had كلهم يعني كلهم, and we meant it. And I see I see all of them inside the parliament, and I know that they're responsible for what we're going through. And this is not me coming into parliament is not about forgiving them. It's not. So for me in parliament, I engage as an activist. Maybe I feel like an outsider many times, an intruder sometimes, because I'm always looked at as, like in one of the subcommittees they would say like, okay, so we all agree, but except Ibrahim, especially on the financial issues. So we are all agreeing on using the public assets to make up for the bank's losses, except Ibrahim. And this is very standard, so they know that. But at the same time, being in parliament allows me for a lot of exposure, a lot of the discussions that's happening. And my job as a deputy coming from an activist background is to take this information and take it to the light and bring it to the people. So this is one of the things that I see myself doing, and trying to match my role as a deputy with my background as an activist. I hope that answers your question.
Sorry.
Maybe I can follow up on what you said in terms of what can you play with inside the parliament. But I'm taking also maybe the case in the US, where we also had these progressives become part of the Congress and parliament, and before they were elected, their speech and their vision was so aggressive that it made us get up and vote. And then as soon as they entered parliament, the aggression is gone. And I'm wondering, just to learn from this experience, and so far they haven't been able to do anything they promised or they were looking forward to. And part of actually the reason is I know there's a very established system inside of the parliament that you cannot just oppose or, just introduce a new system. But how can we be very aggressive inside that system? And it probably takes time. So one of the things that we thought failed in the US is they weren't putting the right aggressive resolutions on the floor. And part of it, even if they failed, they would expose things inside the parliament that plays into the sectarianism question, is that everyone thinks their members, sectarian members inside the parliament, are the good ones or, the genuine ones, and then everyone else is, But what if there was a move to do something like that? To expose, I guess, and in some ways, maybe back to your comment that you brought to Maz Bishara about imaginary sectarianism. And I'd be interested to know why you chose Azmi, but that's a different, because he's not Lebanese, but anyway. But it's not really imaginary, is it? It's a very real thing. And in crises, we all go back to our sects because it's where we feel safe, we feel certain that certain things will be delivered to us, regardless of what Lebanon is going through or any other country. But I guess, so coming as an activist, as, where can you retain this aggression? And what can you guys do inside Parliament to shake it through that? Are you able to put on the floor resolutions or things, and what would they be? I know too many questions, but just, that sort of... Thank you.
Listen, I think, So for me, as someone who somehow, I've foreseen this, that's why, for me specifically, in my case, you find me not that aggressive. I mean, in terms of tone, in terms of, loudness, etc. I'm very clear, but I maintain consistency before elections and after elections. So you don't see that kind of disruption or change in attitude with regard how you are doing the confrontation, whether prior to election or post-election. So I'm trying to maintain that but it's not difficult to make these stands, You don't have to be the loudest, you don't have to be the most aggressive, you just have to make the right position, you have just to make the right stand. And this is not common, to really stand up and say no, okay, and maintain that consistency with time, well, I personally experience it, will get you a lot of credibility, okay? You might not turn things around, you might not turn the tables, and you might not shift things majorly, but I believe that this is not what people want now. They don't expect that, at least, okay? They don't expect that we as a minority will turn things around altogether. The system is too big, it's too complex, it's too heavy. And what we need to do is just re-establish confidence and trust in the people, that there can be good politicians. There are people who really represent and who really work for their good. Because this is something, I think, for many people, and for many, that is totally alien. They don't believe that there is anyone who can do that. And I think we have this period of time where we need to re-establish and assert that point before, because as an individual, you cannot do much, even if you're a deputy, even if you're 20 deputies. If you don't have that popular base supporting you from outside, and other political groups know it and acknowledge it. This is the change in power balance, and this is what will make an effect in the system. So before that, because we know we don't have 50,000 people waiting for us to mobilize, Okay, I got 13,000 votes, but I cannot now call for a demonstration and get maybe a few hundreds, to be honest. And so we're using that position to re-establish a kind of credibility, and then gather people, organize more people, and create that base to counterbalance the other political powers. And then we can start pushing back. But this can only start by reinstating the confidence of people in politics itself.
Can I add something here? Just two of the people talk about legislation as though it's the only part that members of parliament can participate in, but there's the other part which is overseeing the work of the government, and so they can hold the government accountable. And as far as I know, you guys have done that many times to expose just like you're suggesting. So maybe you could speak a little bit about a couple of those, maybe.
So in terms of exposure, we've had a number of confrontations, be it with during budget discussions. I had a major confrontation with the Minister of Education in the school when that Maggie Mahmoud was killed in that building because he didn't attend the committee, and he was saying that nobody invited him, and he was lying, so I had just to go on social media and let him have it.
Committees and subcommittees.
Sorry?
Subcommittees.
Yeah, mainly subcommittees. In subcommittees also, like for example, now I'm heading a subcommittee on wastewater, and this is we're trying to dig a lot of the corruption and trying to expose all the files, and so it's a long process, to be honest. The problem, there's a big problem here, is that people are not used to following up on parliamentarian work. So it doesn't, no matter what effort you do there, it doesn't get any traction. It doesn't get any attention, So you find yourself in a position where you're saying, okay, so I have very limited resources at time. Should I put it on work in the parliament that I know most likely will not see the light either, or will not get at least the attention enough from the public, so I can show them that I'm really doing the work I should be doing. And this is what I was talking about, the question of what is the role of a deputy like me in parliament. So this is now in question, and I'm actually in the process of redefining it, because I can see that most of the, just today in one of the newspapers, someone mentioned me, and they were just, I'm startled in a way. So in one comment he was saying, okay, Ibrahim is very serious and very active in all parliament committees and the files that he's, but
that's my job.
Okay, you gain a lot of respect even from the traditional political parties. But how does this translate into votes and into popularity? This is something else. So this is where you need to think how you can match those, because we don't have a party, we don't have political infrastructure. It's all very personal initiatives. There's something like I was talking about, the networking and etc. So it is very difficult to get the attention of the people, to show them that you're doing the proper work. They're not used to following out on parliamentarian issues, so we have to work also somewhere else. So people will understand that we're doing what we should be doing.
Though you answered my question and following their question, the two of them, I guess when we speak about balance between being a political activist and being politician, the people that you're saying now that they are not following the work of the politician, but they really want income, they really want you and want all the new MPs to face this establishment. So you have to find tools to convince them that you are working through media, through activists, through anything, but we have to convince the audience that really you are working.
So my question is going to be short and maybe more of a comment, but I guess you'll have something to say about it. So we know as MPs your job isn't just against political parties. There's another hegemony in the country, which is religious figures and religions. And I know you yourself have done many, like in many situations, taken a stand. But how do you maneuver that as a parliamentarian, as a member of your sect?
Right. I'll let Abir answer.
Thank you.
It is very difficult Oh, for me specifically, when you're coming from Beirut with a Sunni background, etc., and then you propose a totally different model of politics, something very alien to what's been happening and what's been practiced before in Beirut. So the reaction, at least from the louder voices, or most of them who actually didn't vote for us, is very very negative and very إلغائي
Exclusively.
وتكفيري كمان حتى. So this is something we faced in mosques and very the traditional groups, conservative groups. But I always believed, and I still believe, that there, at least in my constituency, they're not one. It's not a monolithic block of people who have the same, actually. There's a lot of projection on these people, how they behave, what their priorities are. It's totally, absolutely wrong. Since 2015 and 16, I noticed that how diverse Beirut is, for example, And for me, one of the main things I aspire for is really to consolidate this group of people together. And accordingly, we can break through many of these bubbles, if you want to call them, in Beirut. Like specifically the ones with coming from a religious background. I sit with many Islamists now. We have very heated debates and discussions, no taboos for me, and they cannot definitely not impose anything on me. But I'm very open to a more scientific and objective discussion, and I think this granted me a lot of respect from them, despite that they might not agree with me on many things. I've been maintaining open channels since 2016 with many of these groups, and now it's getting bigger. But they know I never change what I say. And it's either since 2015 I've been saying the same things. In our closed meetings I would say the same things, and outside on media I say the same thing. There's a lot of consistency, and this somehow makes them more open to discussion and more prone to new ideas. So I'm very optimistic about what we can do, even in circles that we thought we can never go there, because the system here right now has proved to fail. And what's more importantly we need to see is the generational dimension. For example, I was sitting with one of those very powerful groups, the Islamist group, and the head was a sheikh, an older guy, and having عم يحكي نفس الشيء, and consistently they say the same thing and I say the same thing, so we never intersect, but nevertheless. But what's interesting is that his son was there. His son was actually خلفية إسلامية. He was arguing with me. He backed me.
Oh.
He actually told me, if you want to make a political party, I will join you, but انتبه على الموضوع العقيدة. Beware of. بس إنه هالقد.
So there's a shift.
There is a huge shift, and I'm very optimistic about the future, and that's what makes me continue working, because you can see how, even though it's all up and down many times, but you can see that there is a kind of a trend of positive openings happening somewhere.
I have a question, if I may. Thank you so much for your keynote. This was very informative, to say the least. My question is on the financial crisis currently and the solution, if there is a solution on the table. But because we've done some research at Protocol on a potential way out, and none of the ways that are present at the table right now are being discussed at Parliament, and instead, according to our resources, is what's being discussed is selling states' assets, which is literally doesn't compensate for the losses that currently are at hand. None of the numbers explain how can selling the state's assets be a way out. Instead, it just helps a part of the population gain the better of the solution, whereas the most vulnerable suffer and bear the brunt. So my question is, because you're part of the financial discussions, previously a member of the budget committee, and we're a part of the conversations, how possibly do they justify that this is a solution and just leave out all the possible solutions and just keep on stalling until we do not have any deposits left, and maybe then they think of the possible solutions? So can you just tell me how? Just so we can understand.
Are you a communist like me? Because that's what they call me when I start challenging.
Okay, I see. Anything that's with the most vulnerable is communist for some reason.
Yeah, first thing they throw at me, أنت يساري, أنت شيوعي, أنت. Okay. So, in that specific point, okay, what's interesting is that no matter how loud they say that narrative, no matter what they do, it just doesn't work. And it will not work. The challenge is that how the IMF will respond. And our biggest fear is that the IMF might give up at some point in time, because we have been, we've signed the SLA around,
A year ago.
1 year ago. In May it was, I think. So the SLA was signed in May. And until today, the pro-bankers lobby, they've been trying so hard to spread the narrative, the state is responsible, the state should sell their assets, and the IMF just وقف مثل الحيط. They don't care, they have their own, they're not affected by all this, and they know very clearly what they want and how to achieve it, and they're just fighting between themselves. For me, as a deputy, and maybe this is something I will be announcing soon, and we're going to be proposing our own draft law for the distribution of losses.
Nice.
Yeah, and let the debate happen, Amjad, then, okay, and see who is left and who is right, and who is really pro. Because they always say that no matter what you do, we cannot cover the gap. That's why we need to sell the assets, and that's how they compensate the depositors. So they are preying on the interest of the depositors, who are not aslan much. So what we need, the problem is that the general population is not engaged in these technical and economic issues. They don't know how these proposals will affect their livelihood on the long term, and will affect the economy. So for that, they have an upper hand somehow. Because unless you mobilize people to our side, it's going to be difficult to change. That's what we're trying to do by putting that draft law into the discussion. So we put it in the discussion. We're hoping to get more public attention and more awareness on it, because selling the public assets will be disastrous in the long term for our country.
And up till now, there's no talk except just selling state assets. Nothing
مش
else.
هيك نحن هلا this is the what they say, okay, we'll do everything you want, but at the end, how do you, there will remain a gap. Okay, and the question is how you will cover this gap, either through shuttle, okay, or by selling the public assets. And now we have a third proposal, just to show them that we can do something different.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Nice.
Just yeah. Okay. So my name is Abbas Sibai, and just a little bit drift back to like from the Lebanese politics and what's currently happening. The title of the session is Uncertainty, with the subtitle The Cost of Certainty. And when you were like giving kind of the example, you quoted Azmi, and also like you think of Beirut Madinati, Beirut Tuqawim, and Azmi did the Balad, and But are you willing, for example, to see what's the cost of certainty for you in order to reach the certainty? Would it be the same consequence like Azmi, for example, of being in Qatar and not doing so in order as a cost of the certainty for the uncertainty, or leaving the country?
يعني the kind of cost you pay for certainty, I think, is higher. At least for me, living in a bubble of certainty is something doesn't make sense at all. It's something like you're choosing to be blind about the facts of the world and how complex it is, and just live in a safe bubble with all your imaginary ideas about how it is. So this for me is a higher cost than engaging into politics to better our lives. And if the price be it, I leave the country, so fine. You know, we pay every day for our choices. So يعني, it's something that we signed up for. We know the cost for it. We're doing the battle. I hope we can sustain it. That's what's important. And we continue no matter what the costs are. So for me, it's يعني عارفين احنا عشو فيكين, you know. So
They called you a dreamer.
me,
The people.
of course. In every single time, whenever we had this discussion since 2016 with the people, they'll consistently say, like Abi said, we're dreamers, we're too idealists, it will not work, etc. And every time, in every milestone, we prove them wrong. يعني بيروت مدينتي بكلنا بيروت وبيروت تقارن. You know, what more can you prove them wrong by getting 13,000 votes and coming second in Beirut with no campaign, barely a campaign of money, with no كيف?
I took a plane, came, voted for you.
But this is very interesting, and I really don't know who voted for me. I really don't know, and يعني هلا after سمعك voice messages, how people were reacting. It's amazing, and how they got to know about me even though I didn't have a media campaign. I was on a few TV shows, but I think it's consistency, and the good old way of word of mouth. It really works. You know, you build a reputation, you become consistent, and I think that's the best way to promote either individuals or our cause.
I love the metaphor of the wall, the cracks in the wall, so you see the possibilities on the other side. And I wanted to see that those possibilities, you know, I want to know how that applies in how you're going about in voting for a president. I mean, do you feel like you need to compromise? Do you feel like there are so many possibilities that you can't accept what is already there on the table? So I just wanted to have a clearer idea on that issue.
I can tell you something. Me as a person, I always really pick up sides very carefully. You know, the president election is something that we knew long time ago won't have a real big say in it, you know, unless يعني في هلا في political conditions ما بعرف إذا نفوت فيهم هلا. Either you go into one of the camps and you become just a figure, 13, 12, whatever it is, and يا 14 يا 8, and that you contribute somehow in influencing that the elections. But other than that, you can't do much for us. It's not about disengaging. It's the reality of it. You know, some people would think it's a bit like giving up. You're not doing your role. You're not doing politics. You're not engaging, etc. Trust me, I can go through with you in every single detail and show and demonstrate that we cannot just play a role without a heavy political price. Okay, even it's a very minor role still. So for me, you have to look for the cracks. Maybe the cracks don't exist yet in the parliament. Okay, or at least بانتخاب الرئيس يعني electing the president. Maybe there are no cracks yet there, and the proof is that يعني we can talk about politics. يعني the price for the compromise to elect a president is not a local price. No one can pay the political price for electing a president locally. ما حدا عنده ثمن التسوية السياسية. So this is something beyond Lebanon, unfortunately. And no matter what we tried since the beginning of that, we initiated a presidential initiative. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Yeah, the point of that was to show that we have a proposal, we have certain criteria, we have an elements of a vision that we would like the candidates to endorse, and that how the elections for the president should be. Trying to put a framework. Unfortunately, for many reasons, it didn't reach very good results. But nevertheless, we were anticipating that point, and we will arrive to this point. So the point of that initiative back then was to demonstrate that we already did all we can. I am not under pressure to deliver more than what I can, and I will not go beyond just to show that to demonstrate that I'm doing my job as a parliamentarian at the expense of my political principles and my convictions. So this is something, and I've set this kind of framework for me, So I don't think we can do much, in conclusion, and no one can do much in that on the local level, unfortunately.
So unfortunately, we're way over time, but I know the conversation is very interesting. We're going to take two final questions, one and then finally two, and then let Benny go.
A small anecdote on who voted for you. I was doing my nails before the elections, and the lady who was doing my nails said, I live in طريق جديدة, and all the men around me are boycotting the elections, but I'm voting for Ibrahim Naimi. And I was so happy.
Women. I will tell you something. Honestly, I know. Just yesterday I was discussing with an
That's not my full question, but yes. No. I mean, and then I'll come back.
طيب I think we had 25% extra of women voting for me. Okay, so women were really engaged and really passionate about the election. I can tell you that. And women and youth and expats. I can tell you, هلا from the team who work with me, I think 80% are women. A lot of indicator. Oh yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So my question is about the role of media, and if you think it has been more in your journey more beneficial for you, or actually, because I'm talking about traditional media, I'm not talking about megaphone and the social media, but I'm talking about the media that until today they promote the banks, they promote the certainty.
They pay for it.
They're paid, yes, they are advertisements, sponsors, the media. So I just wanted to comment.
Media, my experience from 2016 up to in 2018 elections, I had no, or maybe just one TV appearance. 2018, it was just one TV appearance. And we still got تقريبا نص حاصل that's around half a deputy, 5% of the vote in there, which is very significant given who was running. Hariri was still high, Hezbollah, Makhzoumi, Ahbesh. You had the big players still then, okay? And we had no access to media. طلعت على تلفزيون لبنان مرة. Yeah. I promise you, that was it. And I was very happy that we were able to. Yeah. So it was. يعني media were not on our side. Very rarely. Sometimes, if you're able to create some kind of an event or you get traction or attention of public, they will have to follow, but they will definitely not go after you. I mean, like other traditional parties. So there is a way to force them to cover, us and to cover what we do. If you're able to really create some noise, there is a way to influence them. Also through personal connections, you can do some kind of work there. But yes, their interests very much intertwined with the political establishment, with the banks and everything. And I know that some of the journalists or economists who spoke against the banks are now banned from going on many of the TVs. So yes, they do. But still, I think they cannot create popularity. It's very difficult. They can promote a good product or a good profile, or they can make things better for some profile, but they cannot create it from scratch. It is almost, I think, you have, I don't want to discuss names now, but في a lot of candidates who paid a lot of money and they didn't get, at least they didn't match the votes that they got for how much they invested in these elections and their media appearances. So yes, it does not necessarily mean that going on TV too much will necessarily mean that people will accept you or vote for you more. You must be aware politically who are you talking to, who are your audience, what's your niche, what kind of political program, what kind of consistency, what kind of political identity you're representing, and all those, can be promoted using traditional media and non-traditional media. But if you don't have that, or you have the wrong mix of that, then nothing can help you.
Final question.
Last question. I think it's a big topic, but I'm really curious just to know if it's a yes or a no.
She says yes or no. Doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's one of those questions. There are a lot of causes in the country that we all want to fight for, and I think a lot of the things that happen, for example, during the uprising and after, is that sometimes people get lost. Like, I want my cause first, no, I want my cause first. But even if we manage to focus on our similarities and put our differences aside, if we stick to the debate, towards the end there are approximately 3 causes that are very, very big, where the opinions are very polarized, and these are often referred to as like geopolitical causes. Like, there are things that are beyond our power. Like, it's not just about Lebanon, it's about where Lebanon, the position of Lebanon with regards to matters in the geopolitics of it. So is this true? Like, is there a way to live in this country and to achieve some form of change and prosperity despite the geopolitics?
Absolutely. And absolutely, no hesitation. And it's very unrealistic to think that you can have any country in the world without influence of geopolitics, حتى in Europe. And you can see this now in Ukraine, So influence is, of course, and it's not as much as we have here, interference, but everyone suffers from that, or struggles with that, or needs to deal with it. Okay? Our problem is that we never had the chance to create a critical mass that would be less concerned about affiliating themselves with the outside. And this is something, but it happens, it can happen. I mean, we're doing it, It's just a matter of time that we can rally more people, make it nationwide, and attract more of شو عارفني يعني حيثيات, and make them believe that they should be part of it, and I'm sure it will be an exponential increase from there. It's just a matter of time, but I assure you that no country can think themselves as an island, isolated from outside interference. حتى the issue of Hezbollah. Do you see how complicated and heavy of a subject it is? But for me personally, I've had a lot of encounters, discussions, and I think we are very much able to really penetrate into so many circles, including Hezbollah. You can turn things around. It's not, but you have to see in the cracks. Like there are little things that can show you how to go about it. If you don't read enough, you'll always just see a wall. You know? Thank you.